Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to this panel. Today, we're talking about what parents need to know about keeping your kids safe online. And I'm Kim Schiffman. I'm the editor-in-chief of Today's Parent. And I'm joined by three very intelligent people who know a lot about this topic today. I think you will learn a lot. Some thought leaders in this area, some people who are very deeply involved in social media and TikTok. So I'd love to introduce them to you now. First of all, we have Tracy Elizabeth, and she is actually a former elementary school teacher turned tech enthusiast. Tracy is on staff at TikTok. She's their global policy lead for minor safety. So that means she's actually the one who manages the enforcement of all the policies designed to keep kids safe. And she works on cataloging all the content based on age appropriateness. And fun fact, she has a 5-year-old who, with supervision, enjoys all the cat content on TikTok. Next, we have Sangeeta Patel, who may look familiar to you as she has been on TV screens across Canada since 2014 on ET Canada. She's a fashion lover, a fitness enthusiast. She's also a CoverGirl ambassador. And she has traveled across the world interviewing some of Canada's biggest stars. What makes her especially well suited for this panel is that she is on TikTok. She creates some content that's engaging and fun, gives people an inside look into her life, and she's the mom of 2 teenagers. Then finally, we have Matthew Johnson, who has been quoted in many a Today's Parent article, and he is the Director of Education for MediaSmarts, which is Canada's Centre for Digital and Media Literacy. So he's basically the guy behind a lot of the resources for parents, youth, and classrooms that are used around the topic of digital literacy. And he is a member of the Canadian Pediatric Society's Digital Health Task Force and has 2 boys, aged 10 and 13. So without further ado, I think we should get started hearing from these wonderful panelists. And I think we'll start with Tracy, since this event is being brought to us partially by TikTok. Let's hear a little bit, for those of us who aren't sure, what is TikTok and why do you think it is so darn popular with Canadians?
Great. And first of all, thank you so much for having me today. This is definitely a big treat and I'm excited to have these conversations. TikTok is a short form video entertainment app. And what that means is that we have little bite-sized videos that tend to be anywhere from like 15 to even like 60 seconds. So these are short videos and the app is designed for users who are 13 or older. So definitely for parents who have kids at home who are super excited about TikTok, we invite you to make sure that your child has had their 13th birthday before they set up an account. And TikTok very recently celebrated its 1 billion monthly active users record. So what this means is that there's a ton of people all over the world using TikTok. And I think that shows that there's something for everyone. And why is it so popular? I think it's because there's 2 different ways that you can use TikTok. And one is to consume, right? You can look at all sorts of really interesting types of content that appeal to you as an individual. So if you're interested in cooking, you can find cooking videos. I'm a mom, so I'm really interested in like parenting, and I really feel like it's very therapeutic for me to watch videos of other moms and parents who are like having experiences with their kids that are a little comedic. So there's different ways that you can consume and enjoy learning about the world and what's going on from others. But there's also this element of create, which is so creative inherently. And what that means is if you're interested, you can design your own videos to post and, kind of create your own brand or decide for yourself, like, what is it that you want to put out there for your friends and community to know about you. And so I think between this consuming opportunity and creation opportunity, there's something out there for everyone to just have a lot of fun.
That's great. Thanks for that. And I think a good segue is Sangeeta, who spends quite a lot of time on TikTok. So tell us a little bit about your experience, both as a creator, but then also as a parent.
First of all, I love TikTok. Let me tell you, when I learned about it, I was like, what is this? And then second, I was like, okay, this is an incredible outlet where you can have a lot of fun. And just like Tracy said, I guess it was 2 years ago, my daughter was doing this weird dance. And I'm like, what is this? What are you doing? And she goes, Mom, this new thing called TikTok. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I decided to do it with her, and I was having such a blast. And I realized this was a great way to actually have time with my teenagers and actually learn about what TikTok was. And once I got consumed in it, I started scrolling, and I'm like, what is, and I was laughing and crying, and everything was happening through TikTok, which is completely different from other social media platforms. And I fell in love with it. And then there was a lot of the learning experience of it all. But with having teenagers, I think that was an easy way for me to understand what TikTok was all about. They were my teachers. They were teaching me what it was all about. But now that I'm consumed into it, now I'm learning about how to control it as well as the social media platform, how my kids use it, how I use it. And so there's all these rules that are in place now. But I have to say, it is one of the things I look forward to seeing every day is TikTok, and seeing what's new, because especially now that I have a dog, you're talking about cats. Now I love watching dog videos, and it's a lot of fun. But it is a great way to spend time with the kids. I mean, through this pandemic, there's been things where you're trying to figure out what can you do with your kids, and this is one of them. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I have a 13-year-old, and he spends so much time, not excessive, but it's his favorite place to be when he's on his phone. And we're all talking about safety today. How do you feel comfortable when your kids are on TikTok or on online? What are some of the measures you put in place to feel okay about that?
Yeah, I think every parent has a way of controlling it. And for me, they have a time limit of how much they can be on social media. If they want extra time, they have to ask us for it. And it's only after school. My daughter, who is a teenager, who's 14, her account is actually private. And I prefer her keeping it private and just communicating with her friends. It's a world where we have to be extra careful. My little one uses my TikTok page where she scrolls through it. I have an ability to see what she's watching. And one of the things that I did learn was they are bombarded with information. They're so young, and they don't fully appreciate what they're taking in. And that's where things start to fall apart a little bit as a parent. And I learned that the hard way. I noticed my daughter was seeing certain pages where she was asking all these questions and she needed answers. And that's where we had to sit down. Actually, we had an honest conversation for almost 2 hours about what she was actually taking in. And I said, we need to talk through this before you make decisions on your own. So there are certain things that I put in place, and we have the conversation, even if it's about TikTok, whatever it is about social media. We just have to be careful. There's too much information that they're so overwhelmed, especially at this age. You think about ourselves when we were their age, not even comparable. And so that is something that's very important to me. And I learned the hard way through COVID with my younger daughter that she was getting too much information. So these discussions happen almost on a daily basis between my daughters and I.
I think that's really a great practice to keep the conversations going. It certainly shouldn't be a one and done. I'm sure Matthew can talk a little bit more about that, but let's take a few steps back. Matt, you've been at MediaSmarts and working with youth and online safety for quite some time. Can you talk to us a little bit about the trends that you've seen? How have things changed? How have they stayed the same?
Over the years, we've seen different issues that have been sort of top of mind with parents, and most visible in the public conversation. So just in the last decade, we've seen things go from primarily concerned with stranger danger to cyberbullying to misinformation to screen time. But what hasn't changed is that in each case, the risks, these are real issues, but the risks in each case are generally not what people think they are. And that's partly as a result of news media coverage that focuses on the most extreme and unusual cases, but it's also just because it is hard to convey complexity in any medium. And so a lot of the work that we do with parents is helping them to be aware of what the risks actually are. it's also hard to get across the idea that we do need to be concerned with more than one issue at a time, that we can't worry just about the issue of the day, and also that these issues are usually connected in some way. And one example comes straight from our research, where we found that young people's attitudes towards gender, that whether or not they believed in traditional gender stereotypes, which of course media play a big role in shaping, have a strong connection with whether or not they'll share a sext that was sent to them without the sender's consent. So all of these issues, these media issues and these digital issues, there's often unexpected connections between them. And that's why we do have to address them at the same time. We can't just focus on the most urgent issue, or what seems to be the most urgent issue in front of us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Focusing in on one issue, which is mental health, I wanted to pass the question to Tracy. There's been a lot of recent press regarding different content platforms and their effects on the mental health of young people. So with regards specifically to TikTok, how's the platform prioritizing mental well-being of its global community, and what safeguards are there to protect youth and ensure the platform is safe and inclusive?
This question is so important. I appreciate so much the opportunity to talk about it. I want to apologize. I have 3 little children on the other side of my wall who didn't get the memo to be quiet. So apologies in advance if there's like some child screaming every now and then. Okay, so there's so much here, but what I do want to say is that the mental and physical well-being of our children and our teens is an absolute priority that I think we share among industries. So I know, like, I'm a mom myself. I've studied media for years, and I used to be a teacher. So there are so many young people in my life that I can't tell you enough how heartwarmed I am when I'm sitting down at the table with my colleagues at TikTok, who we genuinely care and want to do the right thing for our teen users. And so these are conversations that are ongoing, and that we will never stop doing better and better, right? We will never stop trying. Sangeeta, you brought up something before that I thought was really important, and you talked about actually 2 things. You discussed some of the tools that you use specifically as a parent on TikTok, and then you also brought up how you have conversations with your kids or your teens about their use. And so what I want to encourage all families to do is to get to know this app themselves. And so what that means is you've got to set up and really just not just TikTok, right? Like any type of app that your teen is using, you need to get to know it yourself. Set up an account, become familiar, understand what you're working with, so that when you have those conversations with your families, it makes sense to everyone. But specifically, some of the tools that TikTok has in place to protect youth start with safety defaults, right? So our younger teens, we know that earlier teens, as they transition away from childhood through adolescence into adulthood, those earlier teens need more safeguarding and safety rails. So that's why we have default privacy settings, right? So if you're under 16, your account is set to private by default. You don't have access to direct messaging. And then for those who do have access to direct messaging, we don't allow the sharing of images or videos. And that is because we know from our own conversations with external scholars that this is in the best interest developmentally for youth. We also have all sorts of additional settings like take a break videos, right? Like you can decide for yourself what type of screen time limits you prefer, or you can decide on behalf of your teen what type of limits you prefer and go ahead and set screen limits. We've also recently introduced things like muting notifications in the evening. We've discussed with external scholars about what is healthy sleep, right? And the importance of just like getting a great night's sleep. So you'll see that we mute notifications at a certain time at night, just to help encourage teens and families to get like a great night's sleep so they can wake up fresh and rested.
That's quite a lot. That's a great long answer. And I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that some of these things are happening in the background without them even really being aware of it. I know for me, it's a comfort to know that some of those things are happening. when my child is using TikTok, and it wouldn't feel oppressive to him. He's just using the app as he loves it without even realizing that some of these things are being done in the background just for his best interest. Maybe you could also go on to explain. So those are some of the things that are like proactive. How can a teenager react if he or she stumbles on something that he feels isn't appropriate? Maybe he sees someone being cyberbullied. Maybe there's some content that is clearly not meant for his or her eyes that have ended up there. Are there tools and reporting tools in place?
Yes, definitely. So in TikTok, we so authentically want to just make sure that we've got this safe, loving, nurturing environment for teens to go and express their creativity. It's definitely a phase in life when identity development is incredibly active. So we do have community guidelines that will lay out for users, like all of the different ways in which we do take protecting youth seriously. If you happen to come across something online or on TikTok that makes you uncomfortable, what you can do is just when you're watching the video, if it's a video, you can just long press on that video for about a second, just put your finger down. I encourage folks like practice this, like tinker with it. But when that happens, a menu will pop up. And at that point, your teen can choose from several different options. What is it about that video that makes them uncomfortable? And they can report it. And we take that information very seriously and we'll investigate the content. Differently, let's say there's not necessarily like a clear reason why it's uncomfortable. You can still long press, and then there's a little option that says, this is not for me. I don't want to see it. So there's those features, and then also you can do the same for comments. If a comment makes you uncomfortable, you can report that as well.
Sangeeta, I see you nodding. What experience do you have with comments that don't feel right, content that you've stumbled on that doesn't feel right, and especially as that relates to your kids being on the platform?
Yeah, it actually is a trigger point, Tracy, when you talk about comments and how do you respond. I actually did something called a TikTok table talk where I wanted to, I interview celebrities on ET Canada. I wanted to interview influencers who are the celebrities of TikTok. And it was interesting. What I learned through them was the fact that some of them, did shut down when they got those negative comments, but they've come over that barrier of ignoring them now. It took them a while to get to that point. And it's interesting how as people, we do focus on the negative comments and think, why is this happening? But I've come to a point where I started blocking that out. And yes, you get these trolls, you get these comments, and I make sure my kids don't see these comments because they do have access to my TikTok account. But I've learned that if something's affecting you and it's your space, delete it, get rid of it. Just don't have it in your energy. Just keep it out of your environment. So that's how I started reacting. I am a mother. I am 40. What am I? 42, I think. I don't even know how old I am. And I'm on TikTok, and I do get comments. You're too old. Maybe you shouldn't be on this. And how do you respond to that? So I respond to some of those comments and say the reason why I'm on it as well. So it depends how you want to handle it. But I think I've come to a point where you have to remember this is one person's comment and it shouldn't affect you at all. Just get rid of it. And so that's how I do it. But sometimes it's hard. And recently, Shawn Mendes is a great example who said, I'm addicted to social media, but I know when to take a break. And so he has figured out that this is the time where I need social. I think that's very important. Okay, I need to step back for a second and come back to it when you're ready for it. So these are the little steps that I do, and my kids see it too, because I'm like, you know what, it's off my phone right now because I'm not able to handle it right now.
Love to jump in and respond to this a little bit. First, in our household, we call it 42-rific. So just on that bit. But also there's so many things that I think you're doing that are great modeling for other families. And there really is just so much to unpack from what you just said. Definitely self-regulation, right? What we know from studying teenagers for decades and decades is that this is a phase where they're learning how to self-regulate. So the more that you can talk with them about, like, okay, when you're engaging with TikTok or any other entertainment app, if there's something that makes you uncomfortable or that you're not sure about, like, stop and think about it for a minute, and then definitely find a trusted adult to talk through what is happening, and so that you two can make sense of it together and then figure out how to to respond. Just in respect to like the safety and wellness features for TikTok specifically, you also can block specific users, right? If a user as a whole, another account is making you uncomfortable, your team can block that person. We've also introduced reporting bulk messaging, because we do know that sometimes in bullying situations specifically, those that type of messaging, and this is like not exclusive to TikTok, this is just generalized patterns of behavior, that they can pile up a little bit. So now there are ways for teens on TikTok, anyone on TikTok, to report bulk comments. So I think about that. And then what was the other thing I was going to say? I think I'll get back to it.
That's okay.
And I want to follow up on that too. It's also the pressure. I find that teenager, you know, my friend's daughter is not doing well on social media. She feels pressure to look a certain way. She has to do certain things to be popular. And my daughter hasn't come to that point. Thank goodness, because she's, you know, she understands herself a little bit more. But and that scares me, because that's a lot of teenagers at this age, where especially females feel like they have to do certain things to be popular. And then it's that question, why do you need to, why do you think this is what's going to make you popular? And these are the conversations that are amongst mothers that we have. And I think that's, you know, great, you know, it's great to hear from Tracy saying that all these regulations are in place, but I think at the end of the day, when they're still looking at social media, they do feel that pressure, and that's a big concern as well.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a concern. I was wondering actually if Matthew wanted to speak a little bit about that concern and any of the other major themes that he hears from youth, from educators, from parents. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that and how those are best handled.
You know, that is exactly the kind of thing that we hear about when we do research with young people. That is such an issue. And in fact, you know, parents and young people both tell us that they feel like they're always under a microscope. Young people feel like everyone, their parents, their peers, their school, sometimes the platforms that they're using, that everyone is watching or spying on them. And as a result, we know that young people, teens especially, they put a lot of effort into managing who sees what. It's really not at all true that young people don't care about privacy. They put a huge amount of effort into controlling their audiences. But at the same time, of course, there's a push to publish. There is an expectation that you are living online, that you're presenting the best version of yourself. And quite a few of the young people that we interviewed talked about the pressure to always be camera ready. And some of them, sometimes this led to really odd kind of compromises. So one of the things we heard about was only sharing photos where you look good, but where your face is hidden, because people felt it was okay to be criticized on what you were wearing, but criticism of your face was too personal. Or another thing we heard was people who would only share photos of really anodyne things like consumer goods, what they were buying, or of sunsets. One person said anytime there was a really nice sunset, everyone would run outside to take a picture of it. And, young people in general are less aware of data privacy issues around the collection of, what they're doing online, of surveillance, but when they're concerned, but they are concerned when they learn about it. And this is a good example of why what we might call traditional media literacy, what's been in Canadian classrooms for 20 years now, is still relevant. Because being able to critically analyze things like social media platforms, the cultures that develop on them, the ways that their algorithms and their business models push us to behave in certain ways and push certain norms to develop, is essential to making independent choices about how we use them, just as it is with beer commercials or fashion magazines. But it also shows how we need to recognize in our media literacy education the distinct qualities of networked digital media, things like interactivity and data collection. Now, parents of teens, many of them tell us that they want to give their teens more independence, but they too feel like they're under scrutiny. Partly because, again, of news coverage that highlights the rare times that things go wrong. We're not worried about being a statistic necessarily, but nobody wants to be an anecdote, the parent who wasn't strict enough and whose kids paid for it. And that is something that parents told us directly, that they were worried if they weren't strict enough, they'd be criticized if something went wrong. So a lot of what we do in developing the parent resources on our website is working with parents to help them understand how they can help their kids manage risks. So we have workshops, we have guides, we have tip sheets. And a good example is one of our workshops called the Parent Network. And it really provides actually concrete exercises, concrete tools like scripts, questions you can ask. So if your child wants to use a social network, or if you find out that they have been using it without checking with you, whatever social network it is, there are a series of questions you can ask, both to help you decide whether or not it's appropriate for them, and also to help them use it effectively. So asking them, for instance, what do you want to do with it? Who do you know who's already using it? And how do you block people or control who sees what you post? Putting them in the position of the expert, helping you to learn, empowers them, but it also makes sure that they do understand how to do these really important things to keep themselves safe and also to manage their online experience.
Matthew, that's genius. At Today's Parent, we're always looking for, hacks and little strategies that really work. And of course, it makes so much sense that rather than dictating the rules around social media and becoming an expert on a particular platform and then trying to tell your kids all about it, to empower them to become the expert and for them to teach you and for it to be an ongoing conversation. I love that. Actually, Sangeeta, I wonder if you have those kind of conversations with your daughters.
What's so interesting, Kim, especially in the last 2 years, I have learned that this generation is so unique to any other generation. They have found a voice that we never had at their age. They have this capability to speak their truth, which I find so fascinating, because I sit there and I look at my girls or any teenagers and I'm like, whoa, they're thinking this way. They know they have power. And I think that kind of resonates also on social media. And they understand what is right and what is wrong, which we didn't at our age. We were so scared to use that voice. And so, yes, my kids are definitely teaching me the way in certain things. I'm like, yes, I could have confidence. I can speak up, right? Like that's the kind of feeling I have with this generation. And I'm just in awe when we had these conversations. And the other thing I tell my kids, I look at social media as my yearbook. Do I want to go back and see this photo in 10 years, right? And I say the same thing to them. I go, do you want this to be part of your yearbook? And I think that really helped them decide on what they want to put out in social media. And I think it really works for my older daughter who's transitioning into this, young adult, and she looks at it that way in a positive way. So I think it's kind of helped her. And my little one also, I think she's starting to understand that concept of what is your story? And so it's been a powerful conversation actually recently as they went back to school and how they use social media now.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an inclination to want to take control of the situation when parents are scared, either just completely take a step back and say, I don't understand it, and I guess I'm not getting involved and I'll cross my fingers and hope everything's okay, or to just get completely overbearing about it. And actually that leads me to a question about whether you should insist you can follow your kids' accounts, if that should be a condition of them having access to a platform. What are your thoughts on that? And Matthew, I'd love yours as well.
Me?
Yeah. What do you say about that?
Yes, I want access. It's funny because as my daughter's friends follow me on Instagram, for example, and she's like, Mom, can you block them? I don't want them to see what you do. I don't, and I'm like, but I follow you. And I think it's important. I think, some kids have private accounts, which scares me a little bit. My daughter doesn't. She has her one account and I do follow her, and she understands that. And when it's going to come out one way or another, something she's done that she's not proud of, it is going to come up. Mom's going to find out one day about that post or whatever it is. So it's having that open dialogue and giving them the freedom too, right? I'm not in their face all the time saying you shouldn't be doing this. No, you can make the mistake and see what actually happens, right? We always learn from our mistakes. So If she wants to do it, okay, let's see how this goes, and then we'll discuss it afterwards and say, Mommy was right. But it's one of those situations that I think parents should be allowed to follow their kids, at least until 18.
Matthew, do you have anything to share on that?
I think that it's up to individual parents, and it's going to make sense. Different answers are going to make sense in different situations. One of the things that we do say is not to surveil your kids. So one of the things is, if you are going to be watching them directly, make sure that they know it, and make sure that they know why. So don't spy on them secretly, because it really hurts trust. It is telling them that you don't trust them, and it means that they're going to put all of their effort into hiding from you. And it means that if something does go wrong, they're not going to come to you for help. But when we're talking about something like following a social network account, it is a little bit different. But again, keep in mind that if you're following them in a space that they see as being for their peers, it's very easy for them to create second accounts, to use other platforms. We know that this is something that's done by young people. They've told us again and again in our research that, even they do it primarily for peers, but they'll do it for parents as well, that if they want to socialize with just a select group of peers, they'll create another account to do it. We know in some cases they'll even share a single account that everyone logs into, so that they don't, and this account doesn't have any connections to anybody. So it's basically 100% private. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't follow them. And following them, especially when they're getting started in social media, following them is a good way of reminding them that nothing is 100% private online. That even if you're in one of these accounts where it's just the 5 or 6 of you and you don't have any connections, well, any one of those 5 or 6 of you, if you have a falling out, could take that material and make it public. So I would say that a lot of it depends on your relationship with your kids. But the other thing that I would say is that if you're going to be doing that, you want to show them that you respect their privacy as well. Because we want to model the idea of respecting privacy. So I would say, yeah, it's okay probably to follow, but you shouldn't share things, like you shouldn't reshare things your kids shared without their permission. One of the things that we recommend, for instance, is that as soon as they can answer the question in a meaningful way, that you ask your kids before sharing photos of them on any platform, because that really models the idea of respecting privacy. And that as they get older, if they've been using that platform for a while, and you've been following them and everything seems to be going well, then maybe you can talk about saying, all right, I'm not going to follow you anymore. But one of the things you can have as a backup is saying, I'm going to keep the login for this account and I'm going to put it somewhere secure. So whatever account it is, I'm going to keep your login. I'm going to put it somewhere secure, and I reserve the right to log in as you if I think there is something wrong. I'm not going to use it all the time, but I am going to keep that right reserved. And, kids generally do feel like that's a reasonable thing because they want to know that you have their back. They don't want you looking over their shoulders all the time. They don't want you butting in. But they want to know that you're there if they need help. And sometimes they're going to not be willing to come for help or not feel comfortable coming for help when they need it. So knowing that you can check in if you feel it's important can actually be very comforting to kids.
I think that's really interesting advice. I'm not sure why I haven't thought of that to try with my 13-year-old. I feel he would trust that I wouldn't be using it for nefarious reasons, but to only in the case where I feel like something may be off or I would need to check in. Sangeeta, how do you think your daughters would react if you made a request like that?
I think I look at it a different way. I think the trust is built off the top, and that's the reason they let me follow them. I'm not in their face on what they want to do, but giving that respect, I will never sneak up and pick up their phone and start scrolling without their permission. That is their space. And so I think the trust is already built. See, it's interesting to see how Matthew would have, when he's saying you would have access to the account. I feel that's a little bit of distrust for me. I would say more, can you log in so mom can see what you're doing? I think that's the way I would approach it, rather than saying, I want the account and the password. That's their control. And it's worked really well for me. I don't comment on her page. I don't. And and it's interesting, she wants to show me her photos. So like, mom, this is what I posted today. So I think it's right off the top is that trust has to be built. It's rather than hiding it away. And yes, kids do have extra counts for sure. But as long as I know about them, right? And it's the having strangers join them or things like that. That's the conversation we have. So yeah, it is interesting. That, Kim, you're right. Like I've never thought of it that way, but I don't think it's the right way for me personally to do it that way.
I'd love to jump in just from wearing my adolescent psychologist hat for just a moment and say that a lot of the things that Sangeeta and Matthew, you're saying do resonate. And I think about all of the research that I've done prior to joining TikTok in respect to healthy adolescent development, with a focus on creating safe conversations among adults and teens. And there is something so important about that psychological trust. So when you talk about this trust, that is absolutely critical. I think that these conversations are so unique and specific to families, but I do want to encourage parents to remember that you've got to approach your teens with an air of open-mindedness and trust, because if they sense from you that you are not gonna literally trust them, they're going to start to try to hide or be less forthcoming. You've got to be a safe space. And when we talk with teens, so this is from my prior research with adolescents, and then when I've come into TikTok, we've also spoken with teens, and they give us advice, right? What do they need from adults? And two of the echoing sentiments are, the first is trust me. Okay, so I do encourage caretakers, caregivers to think of all the values that you have instilled within your child as they've grown up, and then trust that as they are becoming adults and practicing their own independence, that they're going to exercise those values and that good judgment. And the next thing that teens say is, respect my privacy. And I think that this is going to be very unique from family to family, but the way I look at it is, imagine if you're like in a high school cafeteria, right? And your teen is sitting there with all their friends. Do they want you to sit down? Maybe. Do they want all the other parents in town there? Maybe, but maybe not. So I think you should probably wait until you're invited. But again, this is family specific. Psychological trust is going to be the most important element.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Kids will definitely push back the second they feel like there's no trust there. It does have to be earned, but if they've earned it, then they do deserve it. Mm-hmm. Just getting back to TikTok specifically, Tracy, you've touched on this, but overall, like, what is the approach that TikTok takes to promoting safe and inclusive and in positive experiences for creators, for young creators?
Of course. So there are things that we do not tolerate on our platform, right? Bullying and harassment. We watch for bullying. If there's any evidence that we see that violates our policies there, that content is immediately reported and removed. We look for hate speech, right? Other unkind words. And so we have all sorts of mechanisms and policies in place to make sure that this environment is as safe and non-judgmental as possible for teens to flourish their individuality. And again, not only do we have these policies in place to protect youth, we've also then got all of these in-app reporting features if anything does happen that feels uncomfortable. And we're always trying to get feedback and learn how we can improve in that capacity. I also too want to say that when it comes to teens specifically, again, like their accounts are set to private by default, the younger teens. And then even beyond that, like any age that you are, you can choose like who is seeing your content. You can choose your whole account Is it friends? Is it everyone? Is it no one? And then you can choose on an individual video basis. So I definitely encourage teens and parents to go in there and tinker with these different settings and figure out like what's most comfortable for you. And you might have one choice for like one video that you choose differently for another that you've posted.
Okay. Matthew, I wanted to ask you something, not specifically about TikTok, but just about, you know, we hear a lot about the dangers of being online, but we know there's so much good that comes out of the internet too, in the lives of young people. Can you speak to some of the positive aspects that your research has found?
Yeah, absolutely. And this has actually been a big focus of the work we've done as part of the Canadian Pediatric Society's Digital Health Task Force. When we were developing guidelines relating to screen use, particularly by teens, although it applies to younger kids as well. But when we were looking at screen use by teens, it was clear to us that it didn't really make sense to be focusing on screen time or limiting screen time, but instead on encouraging positive uses. And, you know, we've seen this in the last year and a half. If you just take a moment to imagine what the pandemic would have been like if it had happened 10 years ago, if you can imagine what online schooling would have been. So the things that we've identified as positive uses are, generally speaking, first of all, of course, uses that are educational. And we do know that that kids turn to the internet as a source for education, whether it's something that they're doing in school or for personal interest, whether it is something academic like science or whether it's something practical like learning how to play guitar or do a recipe or something like that. It's hugely valuable for that. We want to encourage kids to do that. Of course, we also have to teach them the skills that they need to understand whether or not an educational source is trustworthy and reliable. The second category that we recommend is activities that are creative. And we've already heard, of course, about a lot of creative activities happening on TikTok. They're happening through all kinds of platforms. There are lots of different tools that we can use to make media. There are tools that we can use to distribute media. And that, again, is something where even a generation ago, you know, no matter how creative you were, it was the barrier to making media and especially to finding an audience for what you made was huge. And we've seen a total revolution. Of course, there are safety issues here when you're making content. There are privacy issues, particularly with younger kids. It's something we have to think about and talk seriously about with them. Think about options like animation that have fewer privacy impacts. But it's a great way of letting kids explore their creative side. Of course, one of the things that has been a lifeline for kids in the last year and a half has been the social aspects of digital media, whether it's social media or things like video chatting. We know young people have been relying heavily on it to keep in touch with friends and peers when school was happening remotely. Even now, keeping in touch with family who may be living overseas. But we do distinguish between activities that are genuinely social, where you're actually having a meaningful contact with someone, or where you're just sort of, you know, mindlessly scrolling and liking. And there's a lot of good research that shows that that has a big difference. How we're using it in that way has a big difference on the impact that digital technology has on us. We also recommend activities that are physically active, things that get you up and moving. And sometimes, of course, things may be all of these. So if you're filming yourself doing a dance, that may be educational, social, active, and creative all at once. And finally, of course, using digital tools for civic engagement. That is to say, either using them to make a difference in the offline world, because of course they're a great way of organizing and of learning about issues, but also making a difference in their online communities, changing the norms and values of their online communities. We know it takes just the loudest 10% of any online community to change the norms and values of that. So taking an active step to do that, to say, for instance, that things like bullying or hate and prejudice aren't acceptable, and even learning to use their power as users and consumers to change how digital platforms do business. We have more power relative to the media industry than we ever did at any time in history. And, it's great to see a lot of examples now of young people finding ways to use that power.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing that as well with our readers. Absolutely. There's a lot of positivity in this area. It's not all doom and gloom. I'm noticing the time, and unfortunately, one of our panelists does have to go. So I want to say thank you to Sangeeta Patel for your insights and for sharing your experience with us.
Thank you, and enjoy your Q&A, everyone. It's wonderful seeing all of you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So for our attendees, we're going to move on to some of the questions that you've been submitting, both in the last few days and also today. So one of them that we have here is aimed at you, Matt, and it says, where can we get the list of questions to ask your child about social platforms? You're referring to that. Where can people find that?
So that's from a specific workshop that we have called the Parent Network. I'm just putting it in the chat for everyone right now. You can also take a look at the parent section of our website. So our website is MediaSmarts.ca. We also have a sister site in French with all the same content, habilomedia.ca. And on that website, there's a parents tab, and there you'll find workshops, you'll find guides, you'll find tip sheets. So we do have some tip sheets as well, if you don't feel like going through the whole workshop, that have some of these. One of them that I mentioned is our contract for a new device, which can also be a contract for a new social network, which helps you to lay out your expectations and the values that you expect your kids to live by when they're using a new device or a new social network. And by being a contract where you're both agreeing to different things, it's showing that this is something where you're committing as well, that it's not just a one-sided set of rules, but it is something that is a shared activity from the family and a shared priority among the whole family.
We actually used that contract from your site in my home when my son got his first smartphone. He had never actually seen a contract, but I wrote it up to be, quite legal in nature, and I made him initial beside every point, and it felt very official. And we have it posted on our fridge so that it doesn't get shoved in a drawer and forgotten about, because of course that can be a danger. It does have to be revisited. But yeah, a great resource, and your site is filled with them. We have another question here. This one is probably best answered by Tracy. And one of our attendees asks, is there any way to screen out inappropriate content before your child sees it? I understand you can report content, but I'm trying to have them avoid R-rated videos before they even, appear on the screen.
I love it. And I do want to just give a shout out to contracts. I think those family contracts for like navigating digital spaces has shown over and over again to be really effective. So there is one really cool feature that I haven't yet talked about that I think could help with this question specifically. And that's that TikTok has family pairing. And what family pairing is a way for adults, like parents, caregivers, who have a TikTok account. And again, I definitely encourage you, if you don't have one, parents, you need to set up an account as well for a lot of different reasons. But for family pairing, what you can do is you can link your account with your teens. And for those families who would prefer a little bit more of a like a family, literally like a family friendly all audiences vibe, you can select what we call restricted mode. So the way I look at it is TikTok regular, right? If you're in that 13 plus, that regular TikTok experience, it's going to be similar to like a movie rating of a PG, like 14A. If you are more comfortable with your teen experiencing the PG-G vibe, definitely go to family pairing, and then you can select restricted mode. If you link your account with your teens, you can select restricted mode, which should give you the more PG experience.
That's a great answer. Yeah, some of the content that I see that my 13-year-old is seeing, you forget, you think of your child as young, but at a certain point, the content shifts to what actually is appropriate. But it's lovely to know that there is a way to sort of dial that back if you're not comfortable with it.
Yeah. And let me just add on there, this is a great tool. And I heartily encourage parents to use it, but it's also important to remember that any kind of parental control, we do encourage parents to use parental controls, but any kind of parental control, it's not a substitute for being involved, because it depends, the tool itself, they do sometimes make mistakes, even the best ones. And also they may have a different view. Sometimes the algorithm or however it's rated may have a different view of what's appropriate. So it is important that these tools not be a reason to not talk about the experience, but that it's a part of your arsenal as a parent. It's part of your toolbox, to use a friendlier metaphor, and that you're still talking to your kids about what they're seeing wherever possible. You're co-viewing with them. Co-viewing not necessarily meaning sitting with them and watching, although that's great too, but having an ongoing conversation about the media that they're using and they're consuming, and letting them know that if something slips through, if something does happen that, or they do see something that upsets them, that they can come to you, that you're going to find a solution, you're not going to overreact, and you're not going to cut off access to either the device or the platform where they saw it. You're going to find a way to make that experience work for them.
And can I follow up? Sorry, can I follow up on that?
I have something to say about that. Go ahead, Tracy.
I just want, so because Matthew said something about co-viewing that I think is super powerful. And there's also this idea of co-creating. And I have heard over and over now these wonderful anecdotes from families about how they've created TikTok videos together. And sure, I think when we watch these videos, we're like, oh, that was a really cute 15-second, daddy-daughter dance. But actually the hours of laughter and like retakes and the experience together that it took to get to that place is so, just beautiful for like family dynamics and bonding and getting to know each other. So think about trying to co-create with your teens.
Oh my gosh, I completely agree with that. It's so heartwarming when you see different generations coming together, dancing, whatever they're producing on TikTok. I absolutely love it. I wish I could get my 13-year-old to do that, but he's not the performing type. And I just wanted to add to something that Matt said, which was that, not only should you encourage your kids to let you know if something has slipped through, if they've had an experience that, they're not so sure about, but you shouldn't be afraid to ask them. I actually felt like, if I asked my son, like, have you ever seen anything that you feel like maybe you shouldn't have seen? I thought that he wouldn't feel comfortable answering, and that he might think that I would, remove him from the platform and not allow him to use it anymore. And so I thought like, maybe he won't be honest, but in fact, he was totally honest. And we both learned a lot about, what he was consuming, and I felt comfortable. These were things that slipped through. He knew about some of the reporting tools, and and I think the more conversations, the better. It just opens up that line of communication. And if you show your kids you trust them, then you can really, you can learn a lot and keep those lines of communication open. We're almost out of time, but I do have another question here from an attendee who wonders what age, and both of you can answer this, but what age you recommend giving kids a cell phone. This person's child is in grade 6 and they feel their child is like the only one without it. They have read a lot of research that suggests reasons why they should delay this, but on the other hand, they don't want their child to feel isolated. What do you guys think?
I'm happy to, okay, so first of all, I do believe that this is very family specific. So it is very unique to your individual family, your teen, right? Like their level of maturity, their understanding for why they have this device. What I do recommend, like Matthew suggested before, that there's some sort of contract in place if you choose to go this route, to have your teen have a cell phone. The research is inconclusive at this point. So yes, you will see some research that suggests like one age or another. And on the same flip of the coin, you'll find research that counters that. So I think that what this is pointing to is that this is such a unique child and teen specific, family specific conversation, that one size does not fit all. Matthew, I'm gonna follow up on
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. This is probably the number one question I get asked, and I always have to give, unfortunately, kind of a frustrating answer because there isn't a, you can't say a particular age. But there are some important things to keep in mind. So one question is, why do they need it? Because there are certainly cases where kids need a phone, that is a phone, for safety reasons. If you live in a remote community, if your kids take a long way to get home, or if they're walking home for whatever reason, there are situations where that's going to happen. The other issue is that you don't necessarily, there are options when it comes to the phones that you get them and what's on them. So there are phones that are available that can only do texting and calling. So if that's what it's about, if it's about, I need to make plans, in a lot of cases, kids, they need these to make plans with their friends to meet up in person, but then they're okay with just being able to text or call. So that can be a good kind of starter phone. You can also get plans that do that. But it's better to get a phone that's intentionally made for that, because then they can't, for instance, use Wi-Fi to get on wherever. But what it really comes down to, if you're talking about getting your kids an internet capable smartphone, what it comes down to is whether you feel that they have internalized the rules and the values that you want them to live by when they're online. Because when you give them a phone, it's very, very difficult to see what they're doing without directly spying on them, which again, we don't recommend. Even if they're using a laptop or a tablet, you can sit down next to them. You can see if you come into the room and they're, switching tabs, it's pretty obvious. But with a phone, it's almost entirely private and they can use it in lots of spaces outside of your supervision. So really the age is not the question. The question is, do you feel confident that your child understands how you want them to behave? And so in a way, the phone really should be the end of their digital citizenship journey. And sometimes that's going to be a challenge. Sometimes you're going to have to find compromises, but that's the important thing to keep in mind. And that's why we have to start thinking about digital literacy and digital citizenship when kids are younger, so that by the time they start asking for the phone, we're pretty confident that they understand they have to respect people's privacy. They understand that all of the same morals and ethics we live by offline still apply online, and that they know how to protect themselves.
I can't say that's a lovely answer. I can't say I'm surprised that that's one of the top questions you get. It's a really big question among our readers as well. And that phone really opens up the entire internet to teens. And so I think that really encompasses sort of everything we've talked about today. And just being mindful of the time, I think that we've come to the end of this really informative panel. I want to thank Tracy Elizabeth from TikTok and Matthew Johnson from MediaSmarts. And thank you all faceless, lovely attendees for being here. I can't see you, but I'm so grateful for your attention and for your time. And I hope that you've learned a few things today. I know that I have. So thanks a lot and have a great day.